Welcome to Stories and Sips. My name is Barry Chandler and I'm coming to you this week from Ireland and specifically from Dublin in this episode, and the next 3 episodes will be from Ireland. I'm in Dublin, standing outside Dublin Castle, and behind me you will see the signs for Whisky Live, Ireland's biggest Irish whisky convention or conference and get together with 70 different whisky companies. And I've been spending a few days getting to know them, meeting the distillers and the blenders, and over the next 3 episodes I'm going to take you on a tour of Dublin and its whiskies, its distilleries, and some of the great things you can do if you're interested in whiskey. So let's go and explore Dublin. Raining, it's amazing, it's the Irish weather I'm used to, it's great to be back. And day number 1 on my whiskey tour has me stopping at 3 official stops with a few unofficial stops probably along the way. But these stops include the first distillery in Dublin in 125 years, the home of one of the best-selling whiskies, Irish whiskies in the world, and also one of the most famous Irish whiskey bars, or just bars in Dublin, are my 3 stops today. And I'll give you more information and share more of those along the way. But first, we are here at the Teeling distillery. This is stop number 1 today, the first new distillery in Dublin in 125 years and the first single pot still whiskey produced in Dublin in almost 50 years. So let's go in and take a look. So here we are in the Teeling distillery, which became operational in Dublin in 2015, and it holds the enviable title of being the first new whiskey distillery to open in the capital city in over 125 years. Now, Powers in John's Lane, of course, was the last to close its doors, doing so in 1976, making Teeling the first operational distillery in the capital in almost 40 years. Now, the distillery, which is located in the famous Dublin Liberties area, was founded and is run today by Jack and Stephen Teeling, whose father John Teeling founded the famous Cooley distillery in 1987. And the Teeling family, of course, have ancestral roots in the area. Walter Teeling, an ancestor of the family, he established a distillery on Marrowbone Lane, not too far from the current distillery, in 1782. So a family that has had whiskey in their veins for more than 200 years, I would say, are well qualified to herald the return of whiskey production in Dublin. And in fact, the very symbol of the Teeling Whiskey Company is a phoenix rising from a pot still, a fitting reflection, I would say, of the burgeoning Irish whiskey landscape in Dublin today. And if you're looking to get up close to a working distillery, the smells and the noise included, then I highly recommend a tour. You'll start your visit with an overview of the history of Irish whiskey in Dublin, and indeed the Teeling family. And there are some great artefacts and memorabilia here that showcase the heyday of Dublin whiskey distilling, in the Golden Triangle, in fact, between George Roe and Co., Jameson and Powers, which at the time were some of the largest distilleries in the world. And while the tour is quick, it's informative. You get to stick your head right in the fermenters and watch as the 3 stills produce their lovely distillate. And these 3 stills here are named for Jack Teeling's daughters, Alison, Natalie and Rebecca. And they've been producing spirit daily now for just over 3 years. And Teeling recently celebrated 2 milestones. The first was the laying down of their 10,000th cask of whiskey, and the second was the release of the contents of some of those early casks, the Teeling single pot still Irish whiskey, indeed the first of its kind in almost 50 years in Dublin, and the first release of Teeling's own liquid. Up until then, any whiskey they sold was from the original Cooley distillery that was sold to Beam Suntory in 2011. Now, with that many casks laid down, we're sure to see some incredible experiments in blending and aging over the coming years. So it's a great start to the trip for me, and a chance to try the new pot still whiskey right here in the distillery, 50 feet from where it was distilled. So from one of the newest Dublin distilleries, it's time to head to one of the oldest. So that was the Teeling distillery, step number 1, or stop number 1 on day number 1 in Ireland. I'm now off to stop number 2, which is something very special. I'm going to go to the ancestral home of Jameson Irish whiskey in Bow Street in Dublin. I'm going to blend some of my own whiskey. So I'm going to attend a class. They're going to teach us how to blend our whiskey. Really looking forward to this class, getting to understand the blending process a bit better. Let's go inside and I'll report back. It is the most visited whiskey experience in the world, as one of two homes of the Jameson brand, the other of course being in Middleton in County Cork. The Bow Street Distillery takes whiskey experiences to a whole new level. In fact, it was recently awarded the world's leading distillery tour at the World Travel Awards, beating out heavyweights like Jack Daniels, Jose Cuervo and Macallan. But I'm here to participate in one of their very special experiences, a blending class. Now, it may come as a surprise to learn that Jameson or Redbreast or any of the Middleton whiskies for that matter do not simply go from the still to barrel to bottle. Instead, the finished product is a carefully blended mixture of single pot still whiskies and grain spirits to achieve that particular flavour profile of each of the brands. Now, that blending process is led by master blender Billy Lighton in Middleton, but in Dublin at Bow Street you can pretend you're Billy himself and you'll arrive to what looks like a chemistry set in front of you with graduated cylinders and sample bottles and droppers. There's even a blindfold. This could get a little weird, but it doesn't. It gets better and better. So you see, there's an incredible narrative from the brand ambassador, who in our case was the uber whiskey educated Christopher Goggins, who helped us understand every aspect of the blending process, the difference in smells and tastes between grain and pot still whiskies, what gives it the flavour and the aroma, and also we get a tasting of each of the Maker series of the Jameson whiskies to leverage our newly enhanced senses as we identify aromas and flavours maybe that we've overlooked before attending a class like this. The final surprise of the experience comes when we're led from the blending room to the only room in Dublin where whiskey barrels are being matured. The Jameson 18-year-old Bow Street edition of whiskey, to be precise, and there's 90 odd barrels in this room that impart the most beautiful smell as you walk in. And Christopher is not happy just talking about the whiskey. He wants us to tap a barrel and try some of the stuff straight from the wood. I tend not to argue with offers like that, and I'm glad I didn't. Pot still whiskey may never taste the same after tasting a 15-year-old version straight from the barrel. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay long to savour it, however, as my arrival in Dublin had resulted in an invitation to another special event in a special place. So off we go again. The final stop of the day is to the famous Palace Bar in Fleet Street in Dublin, and the Palace has been a preferred destination for whiskey drinkers for as long as whiskey has been distilled in Dublin. The Palace Bar was one of hundreds of bars across the country that bottled whiskey from Jameson or George Roe or Powers historically. In fact, they even bottled their own whiskey in the last few years after the practice of whiskey bonding and bottling was taken back by the big distilleries to be done in-house. In fact, rumour has it that it was in the Palace Bar in the 1960s that a Jameson executive was sitting when he looked up at the counter and saw dozens of Jameson bottles with different labels, all with the same liquid in them, and realised the inconsistencies that came from not having a consistent look by allowing bottlers to bottle their whiskey. And they decided from then on, bottling would happen in-house. It's a rumour, and I stand to be corrected, but I like the story because it leads us back to where I find myself today, at the launch of the Palace Bar's very own bottling of Redbreast. And not just any Redbreast, a 17-year-old single cask, all sherry cask, Redbreast adorned with a Palace Bar name. Now, it's a rare thing to see. Only 540 bottles of this will ever exist in the world. And here we are at Dublin's legendary whiskey bar to witness the Palace Bar firmly inserting itself back into the narrative of the whiskey industry in Ireland 200 years after they opened their doors. So there you have it, an incredible day number one in Ireland. Many whiskies sampled, many great experiences, and only the first day. Join me next week for more from my trip to Ireland. We will cover Pierce Lyons Distillery in Dublin. We'll take a walk around the John's Lane Distillery, the former home of Powers in Dublin. And of course, we'll cover the reason for my trip to Ireland, Whiskey Live, the fantastic tasting experience that took place in Dublin Castle. So join me next week for the next installment of Stories and Sips on the road in Ireland. Lots more to cover. I look forward to sharing with you in next week's video.